Reading Vampires in Their Own Words, an anthology of vampire voices. We are finally up to section 1. We're starting the book finally. What is a vampire? Chris Stevenson has been a practitioner of magic in many forms for nearly 10 years. Like many vampires who are also ethical witches, Chris awakened to her nature shortly after she began practicing and struggled to reconcile her nature with her beliefs. She is currently a leader in standing of a magical order, an author, and an artisan. For the last 6 years, she has been running a business from home, making ritual tools by hand. Despite being open about her beliefs and her practices, she lives a very private life. My Experience of Vampirism by Chris Stevenson. Vampirism, as I've experienced it, is a condition preventing the normal generation and circulation of energy in the body. The average person, by right of birth, has the ability to generate and process their own energy, as well as energy from other natural sources. For some reason, we as vampires don't. For some people, this manifests as the need or the perceived need to feed on blood, a very powerful carrier of human energy. For others, it manifests as the need for energy directly, in the form of prana or chi, a need that can be even more devastating. The classical vampire has a romantic image these days, suave, slick, androgynous, and desirable. Anyone who sees these seductive beams comes under a glittery thrall and is penetrated willingly and in an ultimate way. The vampire fiction and film is the ultimate lover, as well as simultaneous the image of angel and death. And then there's the psychic vampire. The psychic vampire is a functional person most of the time, as mortal and graceless as any. Yet, because of that powerful need for human energy, the psychic vampire may also seem like a junkie, shuddering in the corner in dire need of energetic fixes. For us, there is no pill, no therapy, no treatment, except to feed and continue to feed. There is no room for romance, no glittery Hollywood facade. We are all seen as leeches, as wanton attackers, and as people doing this for the thrill. Few people understand that our need is like the need for food. While some people indulge their need for food to a fault, everyone must eat to minimum to maintain their health. Psychic vampires must feed in order to maintain themselves. Discovering who and what I am was a long and painful process. I spent several years manic depressive with severe heart condition. I was racked by a feeling of weakness, lethargy, and the desire on bad days to lie down and die. One night, I felt myself reach out and draw energy from something. The energy cured my ills as if nothing else had done all my life. From then on, I did my best to do this in an ethical way. And I've kept my health up as a result. And it's for so many people today with their eating requirements, it has been a slow process for me. Learning to keep a proper balance between health and gluttony. I did a lot of online research, often checking it against my own feelings and other sources. I found out that it wasn't like others. My experiences were specific and my feeding even more so. Blood was appealing, but was not what I needed. I did not make strong bonds with those I fed upon. I could draw energy from the environment if I concentrated, and I did so consciously. I did not have to feed on other people, but in general, it was better for me if I did. Feeding has a sensation to it. It's very hard to describe. It's not a thrill by any measure. I liken the sensation to inhaling a very deep breath of fresh air. My body wakes up, gets back from barely perceptible feeling. The difference between before and after is marked. My attitude and vitality improves. My mind clears up, and I tend to think on my feet a little bit better. Energy is my morning cup of coffee, and anyone who has had to get up some unholy hour to do their daily grind will understand that sensation. Initially, my belief was affected by this revelation. As an ethical witch, I struggled when I first realized I was a vampire. To reconcile my needs with my fate, feeding to me fell under some archetypal idea of harm. And at the time, I was very much bought into the mass market Wicca that profess that you should never so much think an unkind thought. As time went on, I developed a more organic view of spirituality. Animals hunt and kill to sustain themselves, but they do so without cruelty. To me, this is the essence of any living being and something people should strive for: survival without cruelty. This has changed the way in which I practice my faith, because I could no longer pretend that all the actions are without harm. Even eating a peanut butter sandwich deprives someone else, or at least deprives bacteria, of that sandwich. You're doing harm to spores when you breathe. You're performing bacterial genocide when you wash your hands. The list goes on. Similarly, anyone working a spell is taking up the expendable energy, either from themselves or the area. That deprives someone, somewhere, of that energy. Vampirism puts me in an interesting position in ritual. It makes it both easier and harder to work with others. I work with energy more easily and can network the energies of others unconsciously. However, when they feel my energy at work, or when they find out what I am, they tend to want me gone. Vampirism is as popular in pagan circles as fundamental Christianity. This is slowly changing, but there are people still bound and determined to make a monster out of you when vampirism is just part of who you are. Vampirism to me is a condition of the soul that can be caused by two things: by being spiritually inhuman, or by severe and lasting damage to the spiritual bodies. In either case, I think that vampirism itself is caused by the ill fit of energy body into the human body. In some cases, the body is shaped to fit these changes, and the result is a serious physical illness in the person. We're affected by spiritual diabetes that has no cure and can only be managed with the equivalent of spiritual insulin. Psychic vampirism has changed the way in which I view the world quite dramatically, because I identify the various differences and similarities between not only bodies and minds, but between souls as well. It makes me, by nature, more accepting of the feelings and beliefs of others, because if I dare to believe my soul is formed differently, then I had damn well better accept that someone else's can be non-human or the wrong gender for their body. It has made me more aware of the unseen side of things. Energy, spirit, and matter are all in a very delicate and awesome interplay. I am awed and humbled by this web of reality. I cannot ignore it any more than I can ignore my own libs. I am obliged to be aware. Psychic vampires is an individual who regularly and actively needs to take in human vital energy in order to maintain his or her physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual being. Most psychic vampires believe that they need to supplement their old systems with this vital energy for one or three reasons. They themselves do not produce enough of this energy. Their systems burn through this energy far too quickly, or they are unable to process other sources of energy outside of the human spectrum. A psychic vampire can take in energy over a distance through physical touch. Wiccan Rede. The core of ethical principles of the heart of the Wiccan faith. The Wiccan Rede states, and it harm none in word, thought, or deed, do as thou wilt. For many Wiccans, psychic vampirism is seen as unethical because the act of taking vital energy from another human being is perceived as inescapably harmful. Sedona is a familiar face for many of the online vampire community. Hailing from the courtly systems of vampires in New York City, Sedona first became part of the community through the House of Illusions, with which she's no longer associated, in early 2001. Inspired by the website Darkness Embrace, she founded Phantasmagoria Syndicate, an educational branch of the House of Illusions. She's also part of the Ethereum, which aims to educate those who seek knowledge about vampirism. Sedona helped found the House of Eterno, and she runs her own website, freewebs.com. Vampirism Associated with Energy Signatures by Sedona of House Eterno. In general sense, most people who study vampirism divide it into two main categories: sanguine and pranic. Sanguine vampirisms are individuals who meet their needs by drinking blood. Pranic vampires take take living energy instead. But where does our education on such things end and our own thinking begin? In truth, who doesn't know how to pick up this book, read it, and parrot back its information? One of the great things about vampirism is the ability to invoke deep thought through its ambiguity. Yet many people take what is read in books to heart without pausing to question or doubt the information. Too often the words of one or two authors are looked upon as something that should never be changed. Certainly, when most of us choose to follow someone else's belief on the subject, we do so because that person happens to share very similar ideas to our own. But how identical are these beliefs really? Too many people dare not to venture out in disgrace for popular beliefs due to the fear of being ostracized, criticized, or ridiculed for their ideas. This essay is about questioning those interpretations of vampirism that have been offered to us by few and learning to discover what we believe for ourselves. Behind the words. When we look at the word vampire, we cannot help but picture of being looming behind the shadow, a pallid figure with elongated fangs dressed in a cloak of crimson and black. This is mainly the image that has been implanted into our heads from historical myths, stories, and Hollywood depictions. As we know, modern-day vampires do not necessarily fit this image. Yet even to our ways, modern vampirism is little more than the aesthetic look or something for role-playing. Many accept the persons of Hollywood or mythical vampire rather than seriously sitting down and asking themselves what they think a vampire is beyond the legends and stories. There is a philosophy and spiritual hiding beneath the Hollywood facade that is much more than capes and fangs. If we leave Hollywood depictions behind, what is a vampire? A modern vampire is being who has the ability to absorb energy from living, non-living, and elemental things. I personally believe that everyone and everything, especially living organisms, naturally exchange energies between themselves, Mother Nature, and their general environment. We can feel changes in our HEF, human energy field. As the weather changes, when we eat or drink, or when we interact with animals and plants, and even as the earth moves through the cycle of days, months, and years. When we take energy from the environment, it can also be in the form of eating, drinking, meditating, sleeping, even listening to birds singing in the morning. All of these activities supply us with a type of sustenance that we as humans need to survive. Vampires also need this sustenance, but compared to the mundane, a vampire needs to take an extensive amount of outside energy. The amount is so great that a vampire becomes aware of its activity of taking energy, whereas most people simply interact with energy without ever realizing what's going on. Why does a vampire need to take in so much energy? There is a belief that the physical body acts as an earthly anchor for the soul or spirit. The physical body binds our spiritual energy to the earth. Sometimes something traumatic or shocking occurs that can weaken the cause and rifts of this physical shell. Parts of that spiritual energy might escape, get damaged by outside negative forces, or just shut down. Once the physical shell is unable to repair itself, it starts to suffer from the lack of absent energy, showing the symptoms of vampirism. A person with this condition will discover that the routine methods for gaining energy, such as eating, drinking, or sleeping, do nothing to improve the situation. The energies provided by these actions are no longer enough to make up for the loss of the spiritual energy. In that respect, vampires need an additional source to sustain themselves. In this need, this outside energy, not any Hollywood trappings, that defines someone as a vampire. Definitions. Role-playing and vampires. Role-playing has fairly negative connotations within the vampire community. This is largely a result of the complicated relationship between the vampire subculture and the role-playing game Vampire the Masquerade. First published in 1991 and created by Mark Rein-Hagen, Vampire the Masquerade allows participants to play vampires struggling to survive in the modern world. The relationship between Vampire the Masquerade and vampire community is very similar to the relationship between early role-playing Dungeons & Dragons and the pagan community. Both games appeal to certain members of this community. Both games have a reflexive relationship with certain terminology, themes, and aesthetics that appear within their respective role-playing. Baby, it's okay. That's my cat. and both have attracted writers either overtly or covertly involved into the non-playing of each side of the community. The integration into role-playing games of ideas, terms, and definitions draw from the real-life vampire community further muddies the waters between what is real and what is a game. The most striking example of this is the case of the Black Veil, the most widely known set of vampire ethics, and at its inception, the code was originally patterned after Vampires Masquerade traditions of the Masquerade, a set of rules that the vampires in the game's world were expected to uphold. Pranic vampirism. Alternate, the term for energy vampirism, prana, is a Sanskrit word related to breath, life, and vital force. A pranic vampire, then, is an individual who feeds on this vital force. In recent years, there has been some confusions between pranic and tantric techniques, leading some vampire websites to incorrectly identify pranic vampires as individuals who feed through sex. Vampire versus vampire. In the 1990s, several groups within the vampire subculture began using the more archaic word vampire to distinguish a real modern vampire from the vampires of fiction and folklore. The most notable of these groups was Sanguinarium, which initially started out of the Society of Lifestyles, the individuals who adopted the romantic aesthetic of the vampire. The Sanguinarianism eventually developed into the dark spiritual society known as the OSV, the Ordo Sligato V. Groups or individuals influenced by either the old Sanguinarium or the new Strigoi V typically retain the vampire spelling. It is also the spelling favored by the Temple of Set of the Order of the Vampiri. So we'll stop here and we'll continue next time. And the next time we're going to talk about Midnight Child.